Welcome back, everybody. I don't know if anybody is actually listening to me read, but I might send out a poll to see if anyone's listening. So this is chapter 3 and chapter 4 of The Voyage of the Frog. When the sails were up and the halyards cleated off to the base of the mast, he closed the front hatch, secured it from inside, unsnapped the line that held the tiller or helm over the side, and jumped off onto the dock. It took him a minute to uncleat the four lines that held the frog in her slip and throw them down inside the cabin. Then he pushed her gently backwards until she was sliding well away from the dock, jumped aboard, and pushed the tiller sideways. She was moving very slowly, the wind pushing her a bit and adding to the movement David had started by giving her the nudge in the first place. And when he held the tiller over, it swung her stern around so she lay side to the wind in a large open area to the rear of the slip. The mainsail and the jib were both still luffing, but he grabbed the main sheet and pulled the sail in until it filled, and the frog responded almost instantly by nosing forward. He cleated the sheet off, grabbed the jib sheet, and pulled the jib in until it filled too. The frog jumped up to the speed of 4.5 knots. It was a graceful, clean, neat, silent maneuver. Owen had taught him to sail from the dock before he let him sail in the open. Most people use their motors to get out of the marina, firing them up in the slip and backing out with great noise and smell. That's how Owen put it, a great noise and smell. But he had made David learn the feel of the boat, learn to ease her backward out of the slip gently, silently, then let the sails fill and move forward effortlessly. She's made to move on the wind, Owen would say, made to feel the wind and move with it. The motor is an insult. The wind was perhaps 20 knots now, perfect for driving the frog at maximum speed and comfort. And he turned towards the harbor breakwaters and mouth, moved her nose up into the direction of the wind a bit. He noticed that the wind came directly across his beam, straight from the north as he headed west out of the harbor. It was a beam reach. It was the fastest way to sail, across the face of the wind, and he turned the mainsail and the jib to make the curved bellies of power that meant they were using as much as the wind as possible. The frog responded like a thing alive. She fairly jumped forward in the smooth water of the marina. David brought her up a bit more into the wind as he sailed between the two breakwater made of huge stones, two retaining walls that stuck out into the ocean. Across the front of the two walls, to block the seas from entering the harbor, was another retaining wall of boulders. He brought the frog out to the sea, holding her high side of the harbor mouth, the upwind northward side, to give himself as much room as possible to clear the crosswall. As he came to the opening, he brought her downwind a bit, let the sails out a hair, and the frog slipped cleanly beyond the harbor and into the open sea. Immediately, the swells took her. In the marina, the water was flat like a lake, sheltered and placid. But as soon as the frog cleared the retaining wall, she took full Pacific head on. David could never get over the size of it, the feel of the swells, and the land masses of all the earth could fit easily into the Pacific, and there would still be plenty of water left. It was staggering. Storms from China mixed with storms from Alaska, and the power from those storms mixed in turn with storms from Australia, and the swells, the movement of the water from all those places came to the coast of California, across thousands and thousands of miles. Swells from other continents, from other worlds came under the frog now as she cleared the breakwaters. And David thought again, or still, of Owen. Every time they cleared the harbor, every time that David was with him, Owen had become silent, looking out into the sea. It was a silence of thought, almost of reverence, a kind of worship. And David did the same now. He felt the same. The sea coming under the frog, the huge swells, sometimes towering 20 feet above the cockpit, that slid like oil under the boat and brought her sliding up and over and down and into the next swell, were like friendly mountains of water. They were not storm-driven waves. David had never seen those because Owen had always carefully checked the weather before taking him on trips. but he had heard of them, storm waves that tipped whole ships over and drove them underwater. These swells were more like a rising in the water, a lifting that seemed to come from the earth itself, as if a hand were cradling and holding the frog. And the smell was different as well. In the harbor, there was the stink of living, the smell from the other ocean boats, the smell of cars driving by. As soon as the frog cleared the harbor, the wind brought the smell of the sea, the full, rich smell of the Pacific across the boat, and it was like a bath in a new wind. It was close to dusk now. The sun was just above the horizon out ahead of the frog, and David eased her off the wind a bit more, letting the sails out enough to keep them bellied well, and pointing the bowsprit straight at the sun. He checked the compass and saw that he was sailing just south of west, close to 250 degrees, and he mentally noted the direction. Slightly to his right and out ahead about 15 miles were the Anacapa Rocks and the Santa Cruz Island, and he wanted to miss them with room to spare. If he ran a line just south of the Channel Islands and rocks, there was nothing until the Philippines, nothing until Japan, but the ocean. And that was where Owen wanted to be, the ocean. "Take me out alone," Owen had said, until you can't see the sea, and then just leave me there. And he wouldn't do it. A night sail for Owen would be perfect. Oh, and he would do it. A night sail for Owen would be perfect. By dawn, the frog would be well out of the sight of land, well out into the sea. David did some further mental calculations. He was making 7 knots, about 9 miles an hour. If he held it for 10 hours, he'd be 90 miles out at dawn. He hadn't checked the weather and felt vaguely unsettled about that because the frog didn't have any radio gear except a cheap little transistor battery-powered receiver that hardly ever worked right. He couldn't listen to the weather reports, but it was a good boat, and there didn't seem to be any bad weather coming. The evening sky was clear and the wind was steady. He would sail a line of 250 degrees west into the Pacific, a line west for Owen into the night. He would sail till morning, and while he was sailing, holding a true line for Owen, he would think of his uncle, think of all that Owen had been to him. A chill took him, and he lashed over the tiller over with the tail of the mast sheet and went below for a moment to get his windbreaker. When he came up, the sun was setting, just that fast. Directly in front of the frog, the sun seemed to boil down into the sea, almost as fast it took to think of it. And as it sank, it cut a red golden beam across the sea, a golden path that came from the sun across the sea to splash its light against the frog, against David's face as he slid the cabin hatch closed and settled in at the helm again. It was so beautiful it took his breath away, and he thought that it was like a path for the boat. David smiled. Owen would think this was so hokey, so stupid to think like that. He hated schmaltzy stuff like that. He hated omens. But it was there. The gold was there ahead, calling. And David hunkered next to the tiller and held the frog on course, and he thought, hokey or not, he would follow it. He would follow it into the night. Chapter 4. It was about 2 in the morning when the light appeared from the sea. He had heard of it, but had never seen it. And if he had not seen it now, he would not have believed it. David had sat awake through the long hours of the night, past midnight, sailing steadily. The wind had not changed either in force or in direction. And he had held the tiller over, hold her on the boat, on the broad reach through the night, and thought of Owen, thought of all the things his uncle has been. Somehow it made a large part of the grief lift to think that way as the frog cut the calm sea, moved up to 8 knots and held speed hour after hour, creaming west in the ocean. He did not think of distance. He did not think of anything but Owen. Owen sitting at the helm in the same place David sat now, telling what he really wanted to be, wanted to do. Nobody else knew, not even David's parents. He'd spent his whole life working one job to the next, working construction, clerking, getting by. What he really wanted to do was study. Just that, study. I want to know all the things I don't know, he'd said. sailing in the bright sunshine in the summer. You mean about the sea? I'd asked. Owen nodded. But not just the sea, all of it. I want to know all of everything there is to know that I don't know. I want to know about other planets. I want to know about molecules. I want to know about art and science and music and love and hate and dreams and trees. David, I want to know everything. But that's impossible, David thought. Then how much he hated to study, hated the whole process of school. It was a drudge to him, something he had to get through. Owen had held his hand up and told him a joke about an engineer and a pure mathematician. On one side of the room was a beautiful woman. On the other side, an engineer and a mathematician. Each man would be allowed to advance half the distance to the woman each time. The mathematician said it was senseless to try, but in theory, because in theory you would never reach her. But the engineer smiled and said, yeah, but you can get close enough. Owen had laughed. It's the same time with studying, with knowing things. Sorry, that's Owen. It's the same with studying, with knowing things. Maybe I can't learn it all, but maybe I can get close enough. I knew a guy named Elwood back before you were born. He lived here and spent his time learning the beaches of Ventura, just here. A short stretch of public beach, the most explored beach probably in the world, but he studied and he worked at it and he found 4 new kinds of oysters named Ellenwood oyster, 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And an undiscovered kind of octopus right here on the beach where it wasn't supposed to be anything more to know. Owen, sailing through the night, David thought of Owen, wanting to know things, all things. And a part of his brain kept pushing tiny warnings from him, but he didn't heed them. Quick little thoughts about the distance he had come or was going to go, short thoughts about the mistakes he had made or was making. Again, he thought of the weather, but only briefly, only casually. He thought that he hadn't checked the provisions of water, but he dismissed the notions because he wouldn't be out that long, just out and back. He should be back in the marina by evening if the wind held. Tiny thoughts, if the wind held. At 2 a.m, he saw the light in the water. He saw it first to the stern, in his wake, in the silent bubbles left by the frog moving through the water. There was a ripple, dotted line of eerie light glowing from the water. It was blue-green. It seemed to come from down in the water. At first it startled and frightened him, but then he remembered hearing about it. Small animals in the water, microscopic organisms, sometimes called phosphorus, gave off light, almost like lightning bugs, when disturbed. He must be going through a mass of them. In the back of the frog was a long line of blue light fading in the water, and then it settled down again. He tied the tiller off, leaned over the side, and looked toward the front of the bow where it cut the wave that curled over. Oh, it slipped out of his mouth, almost a sigh of amazement. The boat was moving through a blue fire in the night. The bow wave was rolling curve of blue light, sparkled with bits of green that seemed to want to crawl up the side of the boat and then fold back over, splashing into ripples and droplets of light. It could not be as beautiful as it was, not be that beautiful and be real. It was so bright and shining, a thing that the frog seemed to be moving through a lake of cold fire, and he watched and he saw a form move beneath the boat, caught in the blue glow of the bow wave, a torpedo form that shot forward with an incredible burst of speed. He saw first the glowing curved lines along the head of the creature. The lines showed him that it was the front of a dolphin. All in seconds, in short part of a second, he saw the head and body moving forward beneath the boat, and then it exploded. The dolphin blew out the water in the front of the boat. It rose in a clean curve just in front of the bowsprit, 5, 6 feet out of the water, in a leap of joy that only dolphins can make, carrying with it a shroud of splashing blue-green fire that whirled and spiraled in the darkness to follow the dolphin up and over and down, back into the water, plunging in the green light, back to the depth beneath the frog. David was frozen with it. Did not know how long he'd stayed with one hand reaching up as if to touch where the dolphin has been, touch the curve of the blue fire. It was all there and gone, just as suddenly as if it had never been. And his breath burst suddenly out into the night. He looked back, expecting to see the dolphin as the boat went over it, but there was nothing. Not a trace. only the flickering blue lights of the frog's wake, and it came to him then, came to his mind like the leaping dolphin came to his eyes. Why Owen, who found so much beauty in life, wished to end his days amidst the leaping dolphins and the blue fire and the lines of the gold sun across the water, the mother of the sea, beginning and end? David looked up at the sails. There was a sliver of moon above the horizon, enough to make a pale light, and the white of the sails caught it, gathered it, and shone it down on him. He was bathed in the cold white light of the moon, washed and bathed in it. The trailing edge of the main was luffing a bit, and he sheeted it to clean up the line. That loosened the opening between the mainsail and the jib, so he pulled the jib in a bit to clean that, and the boat picked up speed. There were several hours until daylight, 2 at least, maybe a bit more before the sky started to grow light. He wasn't sure how far he'd come, but when he looked back toward land, he could see the flickering lights above the horizon, probably lights in the mountains, so he wasn't far enough out yet. He looked to the compass again. The numbers glowed only faintly in the darkness, but he could see them. He was still holding 250 degrees. Hours before, he had moved past the islands, felt more than saw them in the darkness, and headed into the open water. It was really the first time he'd ever moved into the wide ocean. With Owen, he'd sailed the Catalina anchored, and they'd covered a fair distance, perhaps 50 miles of sailing to get there. It wasn't the same. Still, wasn't at all the same as heading into the open sea where there was not a tourist island waiting. They'd always been within sight of land, and Catalina itself was only 26 miles from the city of Los Angeles. It was true, David knew. They had talked of it many times while sailing, that the only water around your boat counted, and you could get in much trouble 1 mile from shore as 1,000 miles out. A quick squall could dump you in the side of the harbor, and the waves could hold your head down and that would be it, all in the side of the yacht club restaurant. That was all true. But to head into the open sea, into the wide reaches of the Pacific, away from and out of the side of land, was completely different, and it sobered him now as he settled back into the business of sailing the Frog. There was still a long way to go. And that ends chapter 1. And if you look at chapter 2, I gave you a kind of a picture of a sailboat, like talks about what a jib is and what the mainsail is. And so you might want to look at that picture again, just to help you out. So hopefully some of you, one of you, are watching this.